Okay, hello and welcome everyone. First of all, to the viewers on Twitch and people later on either Steam or YouTube. Welcome to another The Turk tutorial. This time we're going to be looking at Victoria 2 and the Heart of Darkness. Um, the Heart of Darkness expansion, that is. To begin, Victoria 2 is a game in many respects which takes a bit of. It's really a country simulator during, of course, the turbulent 19th century. It's been said that Europe changed the most between 1800 and 1900 than it had in the past 500 years in the past 500 years. And this game does a really good job at portraying those massive changes between the rise of revolution, industrialization, colonization, the fall of empires, the Great War, mass consumerism. It really touches on each of these themes. And what I like to say is that the game is really broken up into 4 different periods, you could say. And that will be reflected by in-game events and through as you advance in technologies. I mean, there's really a little bit of everything. And although some people like to say that perhaps Victoria 2 specializes in colonization or politics, I mean, I think especially with Heart of Darkness and the new naval and army uh, uh, army redos, definitely the military aspect of this game has become a lot more fun. Well, without further ado, I'll just show you guys. You can either start here, Grand Campaign, or the House Divided, 1861, which is the American Civil War. We can see the list of playable countries, which is, of course, as all Paradox games, every country under the sun. So from France to Bhutan or Sikkim. The world is currently divided, as we'll talk about, between great powers and more generally civilized countries and uncivilized countries. And as we can see here, it's divided by prestige, industry, and military. Today we're going to be playing as, which I'll talk about later. Today we'll be playing as Sardinia Piedmont. I get the question a lot, what's a good country to start off playing as? And people like to say United States or Prussia, one of the big countries. In my opinion, those are good countries to start off with, but they're very easy countries to play as. A really good country to play as, 2 good countries to learn the game as, are Belgium and Sardinia Piedmont. Specifically Sardinia Piedmont because you have the added challenge of forming Italy like they did historically. It's a really great challenge, and you'll learn every single aspect of the game. How unification works, early industrialization. Unlike Prussia, you don't have any factories, you have to industrialize yourself. And that can prove to be a bit of a challenge. And then, of course, war, and then colonization into Africa afterwards to catch up. Definitely Sardinia Piedmont is great country to play as, and that feeling when you create Italy, just like when you create Germany as Prussia, is amazing. But especially with Sardinia Piedmont, because it's so much harder for them to create Italy than, let's say, Prussia, oftentimes. So as we can see here, Sardinia Piedmont, we can see our flag. We're a secondary power, which I'll talk about later. Absolute monarchy. We're number 13 in the world. We can see our prestige, industry, and military. It's these 3 rankings which make up my overall ranking, which is 13. My population, 941,000. The amount of what my population is doing, so farmers, laborers, artisans. These are your pops, which I'll talk about later. If I'm at war, allies, or if I have any puppets. Um, Actually, really, no one has. Oh, Great Britain, of course. Puppets and allies in British India and elsewhere. Um, and then, yeah, no, that's it. It's unlike EU3, you don't have much options to begin with. Anyway, let's get right into it. Before you get into it, though, I recommend you read this little thing, tidbit. It's largely overlooked, but whoever wrote it over at Paradox Interactive is a really good writer. It really gets you into the game, and it really gets you into the game, in my opinion. So let's begin. Also, before we begin, and this really only counts for people watching live on Twitch at the moment. Of course, you can ask questions whenever, and if I can try to fit it in, I will. Other than that, after about halfway through, I'll take a break and I'll ask you guys and I'll answer you guys' questions directly. So if you have any questions, maybe just write it down or try to remember it, or you can ask directly and I'll see it and I'll try to fit it in. Otherwise, I'll answer questions halfway and then at the very end of the tutorial. So here we go. This is your normal startup. But before we get into it, I'd like to open up message settings. And this is something which is really overlooked. I'm not going to go through each one of these because believe me, there's a lot, and there's a lot of ones you really don't need. But these are basically pop-ups. I know a lot of people don't like pop-ups, but if you can utilize it correctly, they can be really helpful. To begin with, the most important one, in my opinion, is relations. Just type in relation and search. I already have it on, but when a nation increases their relations with us, if you just click on this, interesting is like countries around you, and other is like all countries in general. Make sure these two are green. In other words, whenever a country increases their relations with you, you'll get a pop-up. And this is really helpful to see who is trying to become friendly with you, where a potential alliance lays. And the same for when a nation decreases their relation with us. This should also be green, which it's not at the beginning. Those are also these two are very important, especially for a nation decreases relations with us, because below 50, and I'll talk about this later, but below 50, a country can actually declare war on you. So if you're trying to increase relations with a great power who might be coming to attack you, it's good to see where your relations lay. So that's important. Other than that, you can look into other ones. Sphere, I've done some ones here. It's not necessary, but this is all very self-explanatory, especially once I finish the tutorial. But especially the relations, that's the most important in my opinion. Okay, to begin with, always open up the outliner. You're gonna see, make sure all of them are clicked. So you have like rebel occupations, occupation view. This is very like all Paradox games. They all have some sort of type of outliner. Currently, I got my armies. I can just select them, and my navy. It's really helpful, especially the influence toggle, which I'll talk about influence later. After that, you have for Heart of Darkness, you have the new current plans. You can add a plan. I'm not going to actually talk about this. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to talk about this, but you can see you can just draw arrows. It's more fun for multiplayer or for let's play reasons. You can just close that like that. These are your message filters. So this is like where all your information is going to come up. So I can see Austria has entered a military alliance with Tuscany. So, and you can of course edit this through message filter settings by just right-clicking. Whoops. By just right-clicking on this. And you can see who you're interested in. So if I'm interested in news coming from France, which I am, Prussia, which I am, I'll add all these guys as well. And yeah, so I'll be receiving news from these guys, including all my neighbors already. Anyone else really? Nah, not very necessary. But that's that. Yeah, a lot of people overlook message settings, so always remember. This is the menu, obviously. Ledger, unlike in European Universalis 3, the ledger is not as important. I mean, it's fun to look at after a game. Perhaps the most important is looking at your average literacy per province. This can help, and I'll talk about it later, for industrialization purposes and perhaps even ideology. You can see everything's conservative. Yeah, if at the end, if I have time, I'll go through it. It's not that important though. Find country or provinces, of course. So if I want to find Edo, boom, Edo. This, by the way, is very helpful if you have an event and you don't know where the province is. You can just type it in here. And then here, just increase, decrease. And finally, with the baby stuff, this are your constant notifications. And this is notifications with everything. So I can see Brazil has declared war on Paraguay, Nassau entered a military alliance with Prussia, and this will continue to be updated. Generally speaking, you can have it open if you want. I don't though. If you want to know why something's happened, like what's going on, you can just open this up, and you'll have all the information. You can sort it by combat, diplomacy, and other. So that's it. First, I'll begin with map modes. To begin with, terrain. Terrain map mode in Victoria 2 isn't that important. You can just see, if you hover over a province, you can see what it is. So Novara is farmlands, and then I have a supply limit, and I'll talk about this later, plus 10, and farm size of plus 20%, and movement cost of 1.2. I can see that here. So Annecy, for example, mountains, and it's got different modifiers, which you can look at yourself. Note that different terrain also affects your the resources you produce. So generally speaking, farmlands are really great because they give you boost, while hilly mountains or desert gives you like minus 50 farm size, or even vast tundra. So more hostile. So more land does not necessarily mean more riches. It has a lot to do with the type of land you have. So hills are good, are fine, and farmland and plains are really great as well. So that's that. Political map mode is what you're going to be spending 90% of your time on. It's basically a political map mode of the entire world. There's nothing much I can say about that. Infrastructure. I'll talk about infrastructure later on. This is basically your railroads. This highlights the level of railroads you have. Currently, I don't have any, but you'll see it more highlighted, or where you have to build, where you can build new railroads when I've actually researched railroad technology. If you go to, you can also see all the RGOs. These are resource gathering operations. We'll talk about that later. So these are all the resources I'm producing. And the reason why they're showing you this is because you can coordinate where you build a railroad with what type of resources you have. Um, and I'll talk about this later. That's infrastructure map mode. Um, diplomatic map mode, uh, you can see basically your diplomatic stance with different countries. Currently, I don't have anything special except for these lines, these golden lines. And the same goes for Prussia. You can see all these golden lines. This is a unification process. Like, I don't have cores on this territory, and I'll talk about cores later, but I don't have claims, as you can call them, on all this territory, nor does Prussia on all this territory, but I can unify it, or not only me, anyone in this area. So two Sicilies can, Papal States, just like in Germany, Bavaria, Württemberg, Mecklenburg, Hanover, they can all create Germany themselves. Anyone in this that has their capital, I should add. So for example, France cannot create Germany, even though it has a bit of Germany within it, German cores. But this golden stripes. Other than that, you can see who has claims where. So for example, we can see that France, that Papal States are in France's sphere of influence, which I'll talk about later, and that Algeria here, they do not have cores on. You see that by the white lines. And if I click there, you can see only Algeria has cores, not France. Similarly, I can see Brazil is at war with Paraguay, and the green means they have cores on Iguatemi. Sorry if I butchered that, but they have cores on this province, and they can declare war for it. Other than that, you can see Colombia, United States. You can see a lot of basically diplomatic information. But again, that's really it for diplomatic map mode. Next, region. Region map mode is basically all your pops, as I was saying, your population groups are sorted into different regions. Also your factories. So if I build one type of factory, a cement factory in this region over here, and this region, by the way, is Piedmont. I can see that by hovering over it. I cannot build another cement factory. Other examples include the military units you can build per region. Regions are basically how the game organizes territory and populations. It's important to look at when you're seeing what type of factories you can build. Other than that, it's not that important. Also, another use for it is to see where you can conquer. Unlike in Europa Universalis 3 or other Paradox games, you cannot conquer just annex one territory. You have to annex entire states or regions. So if I wanted to attack Austria, I cannot just take Milan. I'd have to take Lombardia, and I'd have to fight for all of it. Same with France, and if I want to take Provence, for example, I'd have to take it all, not just Toulon or Fayos. Next is Revolt Risk map mode. Revolt Risk is, as it says, Revolt Risk, how the chance that your pops will rise up and try to attack you. Currently it's all green, which is good, so I have 0 militancy. But also you can see these type of little pictures here and here. I'll talk about them more later, but these are crime. This is crime, basically. So for example, Savona has immoral business, which is prostitutes, basically. Nice has spoil system. Turin has rotten boroughs, and I'll talk about these later. But that's basically crime and revolt. Administrative map mode is very important as well. Um, I'll talk about administrative efficiency when we get to budget, but you can see the different parts that need help. Um, that need help administratively. So, for example, Annecy and Champy, they only have 25%, while Piedmont has 44%. A lot of this actually has to do, and of course I'll get into this later on, with accepted cultures. Currently, most of Savoie is French, so it's going to be a lot harder for me to administer the province, at least at the beginning of the game. And for example, in Sardinia, most of them are South Italian, while I'm only accepting North Italian culture. So it's much easier for me to administer Piedmont because the population there are a lot more willing. I'll talk about this later. Colonial map mode is really only useful when we get up to the point of being able to colonize Africa. You can very simply, you can see all the RGOs again. This is to kind of help you plan out where you want to colonize, because of course you don't want to colonize in an area that has bad resources. But it basically tells you where you can colonize. And currently, this gray is showing me that I cannot colonize at all. And the light gray, I suppose you could call it, the darker gray is where an independent country where you can obviously not colonize. Again, I'll talk about this later. Recruitment map mode is basically, as I was saying, you recruit by region, by province within a region. So within Piedmont, Genoa can wield me 2 brigades. If I hover over it, I can read there is currently 1 brigade recruited from this province, and the soldier pops can support 2 brigades at maximum. Everywhere else is this golden, yellow, which means I cannot produce any more units until I promote more soldier pops, more soldier populations. So that's recruitment map mode. National focus, and I'll talk about this later, is basically where I have my national focus. As I said, I'll mention this later. Naval map mode, and this is really redone with Heart of Darkness expansion. Basically, you can only build 1 port, 1 naval base, which you can see over here by clicking on Savona, for example, per region. Currently, I have, for Piedmont, I have it in Genoa, and you can see that by the green and the purple. So Savona is represented by Genoa, and Piedmontine Provence is represented by Nice. So I can build 1 here. And that light color, that light green means I have level 0 naval base. While this dark green in Genoa means I have level 1. And it'll change colors as I upgrade it to level 2, level 3, level 4 onwards. Cagliari, the same. I currently only have level 1. And you can see that by the little naval base sprite on the map. So that's naval. RGO output is like the same thing as infrastructure or even colonial map mode, but it shows you solely just the RGOs. And also a neat little thing you can do, if you want to try to find more of a certain type of good, like let's say your people are demanding silk. So I click on silk here, and I can see where I can get it elsewhere in the world. And the color will mean how much it's producing. So Bardouan seems to be the province that's producing the most silk in the entire world. Yeah, so red means that they're not producing much. The lighter colors means they're producing a lot more. We have a question. Only 1 base per region. one base per region, that's crazy. If you take another coastal province that's in the same region for another country, does its naval base go away? Yes. For example, Nice is actually part, and I should have said this before, Nice is part of Provence, which also goes into France. So I can say there's French Provence, and then there's Piedmontian Provence. Currently, France has a naval base in Toulon. Um, so if I were to take Provence, this naval base in Toulon would disappear. It's either that or my naval base would disappear. I think it might have to do with which one is the higher level. If both of them are the same level, though, I think theirs disappears and I keep mine. So I hope that answers your question. But yes, only one naval base per province, and this is to stop people from exploiting capital ships. Anyway, moving on. So RGO output, you can click and you can see where it's being produced around the world. This is especially useful for Africa to see where you want to colonize, and of course just where you want to conquer in general. This game, you should not be conquering just for neat borders, although that's a major part, I'll admit, but also to take new and really good RGOs, resource gathering operations. Population density, admittedly, it's not that useful, but it's a lot of fun to look at. Having large populations in this game is very important because it affects your population groups, your pops. We can see London, Paris are very dense. So these are two cities that'd be really great to take. Two provinces that'd be really great to take because I'd get a lot of people. You can see Cairo and the Upper Nile over here. It's very dense, while the rest of Egypt, see all the desert, has almost no one inside of it, which means that this is pretty much useless territory. Because it doesn't really matter as much of how many of the RGO, but how many people can actually be working on that RGO to be making a greater output for you. I'll talk about this later, but it's important to understand where the province you're taking, how dense it is, and how many people or workers it'll contribute to you. And if someone could explain to me why the Ural Mountains in Russia is so dense, maybe it's just a bug in the game or something, but I've never really understood this. But anyway, next is actually my favorite, is nationality. Doesn't have as much practical usage, but just looking at it goes to show how much work they've done into it. You can see like the nation states of United Kingdom. Well, they should have added Scots, but it's all British here. France is all like 100% French. Spain, you have the Spanish and the Catalan and even the Basque. And then you have like the polyglot empires of Austria, the Ottoman Empire, which are made up of Hungarians, Croats, Serbs, Romanians, and the Ottomans have Meshriki, Bedouins, Armenians, Greeks. So looking at this map mode is a lot of fun. And also, when you're conquering territory or taking it, it's good to know what type of culture you're taking up, you're annexing. Because if they're not one of your accepted ones, and I'll talk about this later, it can be more difficult. For example, the French up here, and I'll see on Champy, are 100% French, which I do not accept, so they'll be a lot harder to rule. And the same for my South Italians down here. Sphere of influence, if you've played Europa Universalis 3 before, and I made a tutorial for this, this is kind of like, sphere of influence, same thing for them. It has a different usage in this game, which I'll talk again about later. But spheres of influence are basically no touchy zones. So if I wanted to attack Parma, for example, they're in the sphere of Austria. So if I attack Parma, Austria does not need to, but they very well can, and the AI will defend their sphere, especially if it's bordering them like I am. So you can expect a challenge from spheres. Um, becoming part of a sphere yourself is not a bad thing, like many people think. In fact, it's actually can be really good. In the case of Sardinia and Piedmont, you actually want to be sphered by France because it's easier at getting an alliance with them defending you. They'll also beat up rebels for you oftentimes. Um, and with that added alliance for Sardinia and Piedmont, at least it will be easier for you to get them to help you out against Austria and creating Italy, like they did historically, I suppose. But spheres of influence are very important. It also has a lot to do with the economics of the game, which I'll talk about later. Um, but having a sphere is a big part of controlling the map without actually annexing territory. And although a lot of people rather just annex territory, I prefer to sphere because it's much easier to control. Well, somewhat, unless you have a very large, sprawling sphere empire. But all these spheres can change hands. So eventually, Prussia is going to want to take Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Saxony, while Austria is going to try to stop them and hold on to their spheres here. And France is going to try to take Belgium, and you can have like a rise of conflict. Again, I'll talk about this later on. Next is supply limit. Supply limit is basically how much each province can supply. Region. Sorry, province. No, not region. Province. So I can see my army here, which is 12,000, 12 for 12,000. And Turin can support 40. So I am definitely within the limit. If I go, if I have like 42,000 men in Turin, they'll start taking attrition, and my pops here will start dying, either from starvation, disease, deserting the army. Always make sure you are keeping within your limit here, because keeping within the limit, because especially on your own territory, getting attrition is really, really stupid, because you're just killing off men who could be in your army, and it's really just a waste. So don't do it. When you're at war, it's more excusable because there's a lower supply limit when you're attacking. For example, Milan. Milan for me is 16, although they're farmlands. This is tied into your terrain type, the amount of supply limit you have. So you can see here it's red. So here I would take on some attrition. In Heart of Darkness, it should be added. In Heart of Darkness, across the board, they've made supply limit higher. Milan, however, is not, because they're an enemy province. Luckily, though, for you, is that when you're attacking a province, you won't get as much attrition, but you will slowly lose just a little bit. I'll talk about this later when we get it to war, but it's important to understand where you're taking attrition and how much attrition you're taking. And you can always see by this little skull and crossbow, this little skull over here, if the percentage starts going up, that means you're starting to take attrition and people are dying. I'll talk again about this later. Party loyalty is not very important. I mean, we haven't begun the game yet, so I think pretty much everything should be white. There haven't been any elections, in other words. You can see everyone is kind of neutral right now. The only three political parties, as we'll talk about later, are reactionary, conservative, and liberal. By the end of the game, we'll add on many more, but we can see across the board, everyone is neutral. This is especially important for democracies. You can see what type of political party your people favor. Generally speaking, you want to be aware if they're liberal, especially at the beginning of the game, but sometimes they can be a good thing, where they're reactionary, where they might be communist. So it's important to note party loyalty. Also, if you're annexing territory, and this is something else you might want to think about, if you're annexing territory and you're in a democracy, and you see that those people are heavily communist, but you don't want to tip the balance of your own political structure, maybe you don't want to annex that territory. I mean, and this will change, of course. These change the political allegiances, and you can have a little bit of say into it. A lot of it has to do indirectly through the decisions you make in the game. Um, but this is definitely a very interesting map to look at, albeit not very useful, especially if you're not a democracy or some sort of democratic form of government. Ranking is basically global ranking. You can see great powers. So I can see United Kingdom, France are great powers. We can see secondary powers. So great powers are the top 8 countries. Secondary powers are the next 8, so up to number 16. So I'm number 14. Portugal is 15. Who's number 16? So the darker the color, the less they go. Number 16 is Brazil. And so number 17 would immediately be not part of the secondary group. They'd be just a civilized province. They're just a civilized nation, which means you can't exploit them as much as you can. And they've already industrialized, so they can research all the technologies. So you can see that's especially true for all of Latin America. See, they're all civilized. But that's untrue for Asia, which is uncivilized. And we can see that by, for example, Egypt. Egypt is uncivilized. And that means that they've already begun the process of civilizing. Unlike, for example, Hijaz, which is primitive, or the Chinese Empire, which is primitive nation, meaning that it has not begun the process of civilizing. I can assure you all of them will, with perhaps the exception of Africa. Sokoto takes a long time to get started. But you can see who's begun civilizing and who's remained a primitive nation. And I'll talk about the civilizing process later on. Also, I'll say right now, it's only great powers can sphere other nations, and only great powers and secondary powers can colonize areas. So if you want to get into the colonizing game in around 1870, you're going to have to become a secondary or great power to do so. Next is migrations. I can't show you anything for migrations because we haven't started the game yet. Basically, if you select a province, or if you just look at the entire world, you'll see it'll be either green for positive, like immigration, like people are coming. That'll mostly be true for North and South America, and really the settler culture countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, while it won't be true for Europe. This has a lot to do with, well, first of all, North and South America have a positive modifier for it, regardless, but it has a lot to do with your own liberty. If you're playing as a European country and you do not want pops emigrating away, like leaving your country, if you're more liberal, or if you're extremely reactionary, you have to either be on one of the extremes, either extremely reactionary, extremely close-minded, or extremely liberal and democratic, to stop people leaving your country. As someone was saying, yeah, USA gets a lot of settlers, immigrants, but that represents the American dream, and also the Brazilian dream, and the Argentine dream of immigrants coming from Europe and flocking to their countries. Also in Heart of Darkness, you'll see Australia gets a lot more love, and you'll see a lot more pops come to them. Also, a neat little thing about immigration is that you can actually go, well, right now it's 1836, so you won't be able to see it, but later on in the game, you can see the exact population, the exact culture of people that are here. So, for example, Philadelphia already by 1836 is 6% Irish. So they'll be joined by Italians, Slovenes, Russians, Germans, Spaniards, and you'll see them fill up here. And slowly by slowly, they'll assimilate into becoming Yankee or Dixie, one of the two accepted cultures for the United States. So that's migrations. It's not that useful, but I mean, hey, it can be interesting to look at. Civilization level, basically who's civilized and who's not. So Russia, all of Europe, all of Latin America, North America are civilized. This area, for example, part of British Canada, of course the British are civilized, but this striped area means that it's colonial territory. So all of this is colonial territory. For Russia, none of it's going. Sorry, I'm thinking of PDM right there. But for example, Alaska, here it is. Alaska is colonial province, and you can see that by the black. That means that you cannot build factories. There are people that live here cannot vote. They do not have the same rights as people living in the light green block over here. Other than that, we have, as I was saying before, you can look at the civilization progress of different countries. So Egypt is at 30%, while Tripoli, who's a primitive nation, is at 0%. Persia is 30%. This is important to look at who's catching up and becoming a great power. This especially be true with Japan, who will civilize most likely first in the game. Currently, they start off at 0, but they do it rapidly. They civilize rapidly, industrialize rapidly. Someone to watch out for is, of course, China. If they're able to civilize and remain in one piece, they can become a great power very quickly. So that's that. The lighter the color, the more civilized they become. And the red is basically terra incognita, or unknown land. Basically uncolonized territory. That's all this red over here. And that's it for civilization level. This is especially important, I suppose, if you're playing as a uncivilized country and you want to see how your neighbors are doing. So it's pretty good. It's pretty useful. Relations is a very useful map mode. I'm clicked right now as Sardinia Piedmont, and I can see who I'm friendly with. So with France, I have 125, as I can see in the toolbar. Austria 50, but you can also do it with other countries. So Spain has 55 with France, Austria has minus 20 with the Ottoman Empire, and minus 150 with Anhalt. That must be a historical thing. I'm not sure why they would hate Anhalt so much. Prussia, you can see, and so on and so forth. So basically showing you the relations with different countries, especially important later in the game. And another new map mode is Crisis. By the way, Naval and Crisis are new to Heart of Darkness. Crisis basically shows you where there can be a potential flare-up. This will change as the game continues, but this is basically where other countries have cores. So for example, Ireland has cores on all of British Ireland. So they can, they themselves, the AI, will find either historical or semi-random times to begin a crisis in one of these areas. So it can either be Poland, as you can see here. See, a lot of Austria can have flare-ups because a lot of it is different countries have different cores on the territory. For example, Hungary, Romania. So they can demand their independence as part of a crisis. And I'll talk about crises later. You can see also the Ottoman Empire is the same. And that's it for map modes. I'm going to go back to political, because as I said, we do 90% of the time we're on political map mode. And this is just the mini-map. And that's it for this basic stuff. Next, we're going to look at up here. This is something which you'll be looking at a lot as well. You can see our flag over here. You can see we're a secondary power. If you hover over it, you can see the 8 countries with the highest rank are great powers who have the ability to influence and control lesser nations. The next 8 are secondary powers who have the ability to colonize and will challenge the great powers at times. The final two ranks are civilized and uncivilized nations, who are rated depending if they are westernized or not. But all of this is dependent on three things: prestige, industrial power, and military power. The 10 over here means I have 10 prestige, and that I'm ranked 11th in the world because of this 10 prestige. If you hover over prestige, prestige is accumulated through cultural development and performing well with your country. So basically succeeding, winning wars, gaining territory, gaining a sphere, having good. What's another one? Researching arts and culture through your technology. Talk about that later. Right now, if you hover over it, I can see that I'm a secondary power, so I get a boost to prestige. So if you hover over it, you can see the different modifiers which are increasing it. And this is not the only modifier, by the way. There are also hidden ones, which you cannot see, but it'll slowly increase it. For the player, by the way, prestige will be the easiest thing to get. Industrial power is very important. Industry score is a measure of your level of industrialization. It is a combination of the number of factories and the total value of goods output of your country. It's not the amount of factories you have necessarily, but a lot of it has to do with the amount of output you can make. And that's really where the difference comes. Because Russia might have a lot of factories, but their output might not be that great. So you would have a higher industrial power than them. So currently I have 0 because I have 0 factories. So I'm number 26 in that regard, which is frankly really bad. So I have to do something about that. And next is military power, so which I have 8 points towards. So the military score is a measure of the power of your army. It scores your military by both size and equipment. So the size of it and how well, and the technology, basically. The technology, how much military technology you have. That's what affects it. Also, if you mobilize, because you have a much larger army, your military power will increase dramatically. And you'll realize that you can be safe from dropping out of great power status or secondary power status for a brief time. Next is colonial power. Oh, wait, so before I end, so all of these are added up, and that's what comes up with what ranking you are. Guys, ranking is everything in this game. Hierarchy, from your population to global nations, is everything. Hierarchy is very important, and and part of our job, or part of anybody's job, is to get up to great power status, or at the very least secondary power status. But everyone should have the ability to get up to great power status, unless I suppose you're playing as Krakow, which would be insanely hard. Although I have seen it done before. Other than that, it's colonial power. I'll talk about a bit about this later on. Basically, it's colonial power is colonial power is summed up by the amount of capital ships, big ships, and the amount of ports you have, and the level of ports. That's what gives you how much colonial power you have. Currently, I have 168, and also, sorry, from improved technology as well. That's another one. Currently, I have 168, so 100 from improved technology, 68 from, as I was saying, the number of ships I have, and capital ships, which are the big ships, not transports, for example. Big ships I have, and the amount of ports and the level of the ports I have. So I would take these points. I have 168 points to spend, and for example, if I wanted to colonize, let's say, West Morocco, if I hover over this, it would take me... Well, I can't currently see what it is colonize, and I'll tell you why later on. But it would take me 80, I believe it is, 80 colonial power to begin the process. I might be wrong. Obviously, I cannot do much right now, but I can dramatically increase that as the game goes on by increasing my naval tech and increasing the amount of capital ships I have. So that's colonial power. By the way, to give up colonial power, you can release countries. It's just territory you control that contributes to this. Next, so I'm just looking over my notes. So it's ports plus level and the number of capital ships. Before I go into production or begin these ones, these are your most important um, screens. These are your most important screens up here. Very important. But before I begin, I'd like to talk about POPs, which are right here in budget. After that, I'll go one by one from production onwards. You can see here the different, this is the easiest way to show it. Also, I could go to population and I can see the different POPs up here. But I think this gives you a more accurate presentation of who they are and what they are. This game is really a game between a versus between poor, the middle class, and the rich. Contrary to popular belief, you are not rooting for the rich. I know you'll see, I mean, people can disagree with me on this. I really don't care. But really, the people you're rooting for is the middle class. Just like today, what makes a country great is its middle class. The reason why we care so much about China today is not because they have ginormous industrial power. It's because of their growing middle class and the consumer base that it comes with. The rich make up a very tiny percent, and they'll definitely help you. But in my opinion, they're just agents trying to. They're basically agents trying. They should be used as agents helping to grow your middle class, as the poor are agents helping your middle class. Currently, my middle class is puny. It's just a little bit, and you can see kind of how much money it's bringing in. It's only bringing in, it's actually bringing in less than the rich, which should be completely the opposite. And that means my middle class is very small at the moment. But let me go through each one of these. And let me say, by the way, guys, it's extremely important to know each one of these POPs inside and out. You should recognize them immediately, what they mean to your country and everything. These are your people, and they will change your country accordingly. Craftsmen, so I'll begin. So poor, basically, so we can hover over this. This controls how much of the poor's strata's income will be controlled as tax. Too heavy taxation will leave them less money to spend on their own needs. I'll talk about more in depth about this later when we get to population, but let's begin. So craftsmen basically are the people that work in your factories. That's all they do. They gain money from the factories. They get paid through the factories, and they go home and they spend their money on goods to keep them alive, to go back to work the next day. Farmers are, well, basically people that work on farming RGOs, resource gathering operations. So they'll work on things like wheat, cotton, different things that need to be planted, basically. Laborers are exact same as farmers, except they work in the mines. They work at chopping down trees, so like coal, oil would be one of them. Coal, oil, lumber. That's what laborers are good for. Slaves, I don't currently have any POPs. By the way, the gray means I have none of them currently represented in my country. I've outlawed slavery. The United States currently does have slavery, of course, and you can see that here. See 43% slaves, for example. Slaves do not get paid. They're free labor, which makes them great. Believe me, they're great workers. You don't have to pay them, and they give you free input, free resources, pretty much. Except they work at a lower, and they have all their needs satisfied. So everything they could possibly need in the world are always satisfied. So you don't need to pay anything for them. Except they work at a reduced efficiency, and most importantly, they do not buy goods. They are not consumers. And someone is saying, well, you heard it first, folks, slavery is great. Slavery is great if you're an uncivilized country that has not begun the process of industrialization. But guys, let me tell you right now, it's not those anti-slavery movements which ended slavery. It was really the large industrialists in the North, in the United States, which, as you might imagine, is a lot more industrialized than the South, in the United Kingdom. It were these large lobbies which ended slavery because, frankly, slavery was bad for industry. And just like historically it was bad for industry, in this game it is also bad for industry. Um, if you're industrializing, get rid of slaves now. This is a problem for the United States, if you're playing the United States, because you have to fight the United States Civil War. But for other countries, get rid of your slaves because they'll immediately become either farmers or laborers, depending on what they're working on. And more importantly, they'll begin to be paid a wage. Yes, it does cost you some money, but they'll begin spending money. And then they have the opportunity to move up to the middle class or into, well, I don't think they'll get up to the rich, but slaves are really good in that sense. They can really destroy your nation if you're heavily industrialized or if you're trying to industrialize. So liberate those slaves. But if you have not industrialized yet, if you're still uncivilized, like let's say Egypt, it can be helpful to continue to have slaves to help, because you don't have to pay for them, and you won't get as much tax because you cannot tax them. They're tax-free. You cannot tax them, but they do give you that free resources, which can help in the short run. But as I said, once you begin industrializing, get rid of slaves. Also, I should say that farmers and laborers get paid for the output they produce. So they're ruled over by an aristocrat. If you ever watched Downton Abbey, you know Lord Grantham has his farmers that work around him, so they all pay a tax towards him for using his land. That's what aristocrats are to farmers and laborers. They control the means of production, basically. So that's slaves. Soldiers are basically, as you might imagine, people that fight in your army. If you want a larger army, you have to support them. They're the poor because, well, they're kind of like the meat grinder of capitalism. You're going to be sending them where your economic interests meet. Soldiers are paid through the budget screen, so they're given a government allowance. While craftsmen are either paid, if it's a government factory, they'll be paid through you, but most likely they'll be paid by capitalists. Farmers and laborers will be paid by aristocrats for the outputs. Slaves are paid. Slaves, it depends. Most likely again by aristocrats. Soldiers are paid through the government. So that's the poor. Middle class. This controls how much of the middle strata's income will be collected as tax. By the way, this is relating to the tax slider, which I'll talk about later. You can ignore that for now. Middle strata's income will be collected as tax. Too heavy taxation will leave them less money to spend on their own needs or businesses. And I highlight their own needs and businesses part. These people will be setting up their own businesses. They'll be working in factories. They'll be they're your most numerous spenders. The poor do not spend on luxury goods, okay? And hence they are, frankly, kind of useless to you, except for supplying the middle class. While the rich help supply the middle class, grow the middle class. First off, and quite appropriately first off, are artisans. These are people who are kind of go back to an earlier age of guild workshops in Europe. If you think about Europe, they are small producers, like cottage industry. So they work in their homes producing nilting a quilt, making an airplane in their home and then selling it, or making canned food, or one of the different goods you can make in the game. Making glass in their own home and selling it at the local market. That's what artisans are. They're nice. They're small. The guys, they're frankly you need to get rid of them immediately because you will get rid of them immediately as you industrialize because they're inefficient, and hence as someone's just said, good old capitalism. You need to get rid of them for the sake of capitalism and for the sake of your economy. And this doesn't matter if you're a communist, fascist, anarchist. Artisans are a burden to your economy. In the early game, they're not, especially if you're uncivilized. For example, like China or Egypt, they're extremely important. But once you begin industrializing, they'll begin to phase out. And it's not bad that they begin to phase out because they'll either demote and become craftsmen and work as cheap labor. If you think about the Luddite movement in England, where all these small manufacturers got really mad and started destroying factories, well, that's because they ran out of jobs and they became poor. They can either become poor. Most of them will become craftsmen, but a lot of them can either become bureaucrats, clergymen, or they can even become capitalists themselves. I'll talk about capitalists later, but they basically build factories for you. Artisans are important, as I'll repeat this, artisans are important for the early game. Once you begin industrializing, never stop encouraging them. You don't want them. Just let them die. You want artisans to die. And by the end of the game, there'll be very little of them. What they do, however, and I'll talk about this in production screen, they produce some goods that your factories are not producing yet. Factories, of course, are expensive at the beginning, but later on, especially as you get better with technology, they'll become far more efficient than artisans. So let artisans die. Bureaucrats are paid. So artisans are paid through whatever they produce. So what they produce, they're paid for that by your government or your pops. Bureaucrats are paid. Basically, they're very important for administering your country. I'll talk about this later. But bureaucrats are paid again through your budget over here. We can see them, how much they're paid here. Again, clergymen the same, except clergymen affect education and lowering consciousness, which I'll talk about later. So literacy rates, and you can again change it here. I'll talk about this later. Clerks are basically what you want your artisans to become. Clerks are basically upgraded craftsmen. You're not going to get as many of them. They're like educated craftsmen. But what you are going to get, however, are it increases the efficiency of a factory. Basically, clerks, if you think about it, are people that work in the factory, but not on the assembly line, but rather doing paperwork, making sure you get all the inputs in, outputs out, organizing a factory, basically. So clerks are very important, and they'll help you a lot. They kind of work underneath the capitalist, basically. They'll help you make your factories more efficient, and they're kind of, in my opinion, the symbol of a great nation rising, if you have a lot of clerks in your nation. And then you have officers. Officers basically go along with soldiers. There's much less of them, and they increase your command points, your leadership ability. I'll talk about this later again. And they're paid again government fee, and you can see how much you're paying all of them down here. You can see officers 3.3, soldiers 14.1. That's their salary. So that's the middle class. Rich. Currently, I have no aristocrats. All I have are I have no capitalists. All I have are aristocrats. Aristocrats, again, as I was giving the Downton Abbey reference, or any type of feudal manor, these people own the land. They do not own factories, but they own the land. And they will contribute to making your RGOs more efficient. I'll talk about this later on. But aristocrats are good. They're kind of dying breed as slowly as the game goes by. If you become communist or bourgeois dictatorship, they'll dramatically decrease. But aristocrats will kind of always be there. They're the people who kind of own the land. And some of them will become capitalists. Some of them might demote to the middle class. If you think about today in the United Kingdom, you don't have many aristocrats that own land anymore. A lot of it is owned by capitalists, and that's because a lot of them ran out of money, went bankrupt, the state stopped sponsoring them. If you're part of an absolute monarchy, which I am, for example, aristocrats will remain strong, But as soon as you become a democracy, or if the monarchy is removed, your aristocrats will begin to suffer. I'll talk about them later, but they basically help improve the land. Capitalists, and this is something capitalists, good old capitalism. You're going to need a lot of them, and there's something you're going to really want to focus on for perhaps the entire game. Trying to get them everywhere. Capitalists are very important for building factories and trains for you. They can also invest in other countries, and which inadvertently help your influence in that country. Capitalists are very important to help. If they're suffering, you're suffering. Okay? They're linked to craftsmen and clerks. You can see they're all grayed out, and that's because I've started the game. I'm starting Pinmont is terrible at the moment. As the game continues, though, you want to promote craftsmen, clerks, and capitalists. The rest will kind of come in at their own. I mean, also you want to encourage soldiers as well to increase your army. Soldiers and officers are kind of separate, but they're also important, I suppose. And finally, it should be noted that craftsmen are literate. So if you want more craftsmen, you need to increase your literacy rate. To work in a factory, you need to be literate, basically. So if you're wondering why you're not getting enough craftsmen to work in your factories, you can look directly at your literacy rate. So this is all. So that's very important to look at. Generally speaking, the more literate they are, they can promote. Their consciousness will increase, and they can promote. So craftsmen can become clerks, and clerks can become capitalists. So you want this type of promotion. But we don't live in a fantasy world. A lot of them will also demote, and that's good. It's not terrible for them to demote. Artisans will demote into craftsmen. Farmers and laborers will demote into craftsmen as well. There's kind of an order here. Very generally speaking, the far left are the poorest in their respective category. So craftsmen are poorer than farmers and laborers, and soldiers are the best off. And so middle class, the same. So artisans are the worst off, and officers are the best off. That's just generally speaking. So officers can demote to clerks, clergymen can demote to bureaucrats can demote to artisans can demote to all the way down to craftsmen. And that's what you want. So you want this type of demotion. So that's that. So that's all about pops. I'm actually, if you have any questions about pops, because this is this important, ask away right now. If you have any questions about pops, I cannot stress how important pops are to this game. You need to understand them inside and out. They're extremely important. I'm going to take some water. If any of you have a question, just ask it now. You're right. They are listed. Yes, you are actually right. They are listed left to right alphabetically, but they also demote in this order, roughly in this order, especially for the middle class. I was actually wondering for the poor, but farmers and laborers demote into craftsmen if they are not getting their needs. I will tell you how you fulfill their needs next, or soon. So yes, you're right. Actually, I didn't realize that. Yes, it is alphabetically, but just keep it as a reminder then that laborers and farmers can demote into craftsmen. Same with soldiers. Aristocrats demote into the poor. Capitalists can become aristocrats. They cannot demote to aristocrats. Capitalists become aristocrats if they're wealthy enough. But each of these demand a certain amount of goods. So it's much harder to become part of the middle class from the poor than it is for the rich to become part of the middle class, because they're just demoting into that. I'll talk about this pie later, which is, as someone was asking, how do you fulfill their needs? Next, we're going to be looking at another screen you're going to be looking at a lot, which is this. All you do is click and you can see everything. You can see all the information about this province. So to begin, Piedmont, that's the name of this region. So everything here is Piedmont, Savona, and then you have the name Turin underneath that. Here we can set national focus. If I click on this, I currently have one national focus to spend, and this is basically where your country will focus their interest on. So here you can remove a focus. So if I set it to attract immigrants, you can remove focus and it'll remove it. But starting at the top, railroads. This is to encourage your capitalists to build railroads for you. So capitalists are 50% more likely to build railroads. Immigration, and this is very straightforward. If you don't have enough money to spend on railroads, or if you cannot yourself, because of your government type, build railroads, this is how you would encourage your capitalists to build here rather than there, for example. Immigration, this is something people get wrong a lot. It's migrants are 20% more likely to choose region, and this is within your territory. You cannot, for example, send them abroad. Attract. It's a bit hard to explain. Frankly, it's not very useful. You'll realize it doesn't do as much, but it can really have very mixed results. I found it really works only best with putting them into the colonies. If you have a colony and trying to send immigrants there, for example, France might want to attract immigrants to Algiers to increase the amount of French people they have here. If they want to create it into a state, basically attract immigrants will affect. Sorry, where were we? Whoops. Attracting immigrants will send your preferred culture group, your accepted culture, to that place. It won't send, for example, pops that are not your accepted culture. So accepted culture will go to that province that you're promoting them to, and they'll start to make up a larger chunk of culture of the cultural pie chart. Slowly over time, and this of course has a lot to do with how many people are already there. Diplomacy, and this is new for Hard Darkness, is you can increase tensions if you have a core. If you have a core elsewhere, for example, I was looking at Crisis here. I don't have cores on Lombardia, but if I did, I would be able to click here, and this is the only one you can do on another person's province or region. So I click here, I can just show you here, and I click on Increase Tension. And slowly, this would increase the tension, and we get darker reddish color, and then it would become a full-blown crisis. So that's how you do that. Someone's asking, doesn't attract immigrants also work for those immigrating to one's country? I'm not sure. You cannot use it on another country. That's what you mean. Okay, so he's giving the example of USCA or USCA. The reason why you're getting a lot of immigrants in USCA is because North and South America have a very high modifier to send immigrants towards them. I mean, as far as my research can tell me, that's not what attract immigrants does. Attract immigrants only affects within your own population. It only affects, as you can read, migrants are 20% more likely to choose your region. Your own accepted culture. That's what attract immigrants does. Hope that answers your question. So it's only within your country. You cannot attract Austrian pops to come to Sardinia, for example, if I wanted to. So that's attract immigrants, increase tension. So it has to be at a flashpoint, basically. And the flashpoints are all the blue areas. Next, we have promotion. And I was talking about this before right here. I was telling you how they could promote upwards to middle class and to the rich. Here I can do that. I can encourage aristocrats, artisans. You can see all of them here. I'll go through them quickly. Aristocrats you'll most likely never use. The ones that you'll use most likely are, and definitely not encourage artisans really, unless you're in a large uncivilized country like China perhaps. But bureaucrats is an important one. Capitalists is the one you'll be using a lot. Clergymen if you want to increase literacy in a province, in a region. Um, Clerks if you want to increase clerks in a region as well, not as useful though. Craftsmen if you want to begin. This is extremely useful. If you're having a tough time finding workers for your factories, encourage craftsmen and you'll get a lot of workers there. And especially since they're part of the poor, you'll get a lot more of them from farmers and laborers. To give you an example, during the Meiji period in Japan, the state would go out into the provinces, into farming villages across Japan, and they were kind of work scouts, factory work scouts, and they would try to find factory labor, especially young girls from the factories, to come back to the big cities to work in the factories. So that's what you can kind of think of encouraging craftsmen. It's very important to do so. Encouraging farmers and laborers, I would only encourage to do so if you really want more of a certain good, especially if you're uncivilized and you don't have factories yet. Otherwise, you really want your farmers and laborers to become craftsmen or into soldiers. You kind of have like an endless supply of them. I mean, not an endless supply, but you have a lot of them and they'll continue to come up. They tend to have very large families. So don't worry about farmers, encouraging farmers and laborers. Perhaps with oil, the only time I've really used encourage laborers is with oil or even coal sometimes. But later in the game, having a lot of oil is always helpful, so encouraging laborers is useful. Next is officers. I've actually never encouraged officers before. I don't know really why you would. It only affects the type of leadership you get. I'll talk about that later, but you can if you want to. And this is another important one. Encourage soldiers, because this will increase how big your army can be. So definitely soldiers are very important to encourage. Next is production. Some government types will not allow you to build factories, or if you're too broke to build factories, you can give it up to your production. Oh, someone is saying more officers gives you more leaders, which give you war score. Yes, and I'll talk about that later when I get to leadership points, but that's very true. So, I mean, it's very indirect. I mean, I think there are much better ways of increasing your war score, such as encouraging soldiers and therefore getting a larger army, which also increases your military power. But if you want and if you have a national focus to spare, then do it. Frankly, you should always be using your national focus to the best of your abilities, though, because they're really helpful. Production, basically, you can encourage what type of industry if you hover over it. So goods, so glass, wine, and liquor. Armaments is munitions, small arms, artillery, so on and so forth. You can see that for all of them. These are grayed out because the year is not 1880, so you cannot encourage these industries until the proper technologies are created. And that makes sense for the automotive, electrical, and chemical industries. But these are very important. And I would say also these late game ones, especially when you're more likely to have a government type that does not allow you to build factories. Encouraging industry is good because it'll kind of give you a directive, like what to tell your capitalists to build. Yeah, I'll talk about factories, of course, later on. Last but not least is party loyalty, and I will admit I have perhaps only used this type of national focus once or twice because the change is so insignificant and there are much better ways of frankly controlling it. And it takes up one whole national focus. Basically, you can increase party loyalty to reactionary, conservative, or liberal. We can also do this for fascists, socialists, communists, and anarcho-liberals when they become an active party. But you only do it by 0.001. And you can see this directly through the party loyalty, which we haven't started the game yet, so we won't see anything right now. But it'll turn a shade of blue for conservative, dark blue for reactionary, and yellow for liberal. So that's that. So that's national focus. What do I have next? Yeah, so next is bureaucratic efficiency. The more bureaucrats you have in a place, the more efficient it will become, or it can become. So I can see, and it goes by region. So you can go region map mode here. So Turin, Novara, Savona, everything in Piedmont is 44.3%. If I hover over that, that's my state administrative efficiency. And there's a breakdown. So base administrative efficiency is 20%, from tech is 5%, and then from bureaucrats is 19.3%. Basically, it's very important. Administrative efficiency is very important. I'll talk about it more later, but it affects directly your crime fighting and the amount of tax you get. So administrative efficiency is very good. We can see in Annecy, for example, it's 25%, much lower. And this is because we just don't have the bureaucrats. And bureaucrats are always of accepted culture. So you can think here, Annecy and Chambry, as I was showing you earlier, are 100% French. So I don't have any of accepted culture there. So I would have to encourage bureaucrats here. Let's do it now, for example. I'd have to encourage bureaucrats here, and slowly by slowly, some of my accepted culture of North Italians will start coming to Annecy, and they'll start making up for some of the administrative efficiency here, and they'll start increasing it. Administrative efficiency is something you can increase very quickly, so it's never really a problem. Well, it can be, but you should be able to fix it very quickly. Next is aristocrats, or state RGO, owner presence. By the way, RGO is a word you're going to have to memorize. Resource gathering operation. And basically, sorry, one second. Yeah, so basically this is the amount of aristocrats you have present in this province. Not province, this region, this state. So currently everything here is 1.7. So 1.7% of my entire population are aristocrats, and that will affect directly the efficiency, and I'll talk about this later, of my RGOs. So that's that. I mean, you can increase it very easily by, of course, encourage aristocrats. Frankly speaking, though, you don't really want to encourage aristocrats just for that. Anything above 1% is good. I don't think I've ever really seen. Well, basically, having above 1% is good. Here you can see state RGO is below 0.9%, which is bad. Something which, by the way, officers will become officers in newly conquered territory, because they're of your accepted culture, will become aristocrats, will become the new nobility. So that's, I suppose, another bonus to officers. They're kind of given land as aristocrats, landed nobility. Yeah, so aristocrats are, so that's how many aristocrats you have in your province. Next, we have up here is party loyalty. Basically, per province, we can see party loyalty, who's controlling it. If, for example, the Austrians come and occupy Alessandria, it's changed to an Austrian flag. And we can also see province life rating. Province life rating is extremely important for the purposes of colonization. It also helps increase immigrants if it's already colonized province. So, for example, Paris is 40, London is 45. There's no map mode for this, so I'm only guessing. Oh, okay, so Berlin is 42. And this will increase immigrants to these major urban centers. And you can think of why. So like London, Paris, Berlin. These were the big cities of the time period. Madrid. But then, so this is 40. Well, and then we go to Western Morocco, and it's only 10. To colonize, you need you need a life rating. You need to decrease your maximum, your needed life rating down to 10 or to whatever it is. So maybe in Ethiopia, sorry, Somaliland, it's 15. In Borneo, it's also 15. Where's I think it's up here. Yeah, so for example, Karganada is 25. So I believe the Russians can begin colonizing it immediately. Or no, they won't. They have to decrease their maximum life rate needing by 10. I'll talk about this more later. But life rating is you can't change it. It's permanent. I think you can change some of it through events. I think Paris will increase theirs a little bit, for example, through an event. Not 100% sure about that though. But that's province life rating. It's more important to do with Africa and where you can colonize and where you cannot, depending on the technology you have. So that's that. And then you have terrain. Terrain, if you hover over it, you can see that terrain is farmlands and the modifiers it gives me. So Savona is hills, and so I get a supply limit of 6, but my combat width is reduced by 33%, which I'll talk about later. But it gives me a bonus of defense, 1 defense. En sea is mountains, so I get increased attrition, or an enemy gets increased attrition. I mean, I do too, but it's especially important for the enemy. Farming efficiency is minus 25%. I'm not farming. Oh, I'm farming here in Savoy. So I'll talk about this later, but it's minus 25%, which is really bad. Supply limit +4 only, and again, defense is 2 though. So it's much easier to defend in the mountains than it is on farmlands where there is no defense bonus. So trying to get to the high ground in this game is very important. And also, if there's a large enemy army, trying to slow them down in the mountains and trying to make sure that they stay there for longer is always a good strategy, and trying to whittle them down before they get into the plains areas where they'll be at a much easier advantage over perhaps your smaller army. Of course, each situation is different. And there are many different types of terrains to look at. So this is depending on which country you look at. I highly recommend before you begin a game, just look at just go to the terrain map mode and see what type of terrain you have, especially on your border areas where you may be invaded, and see what type of farmlands, what's necessary to protect. Also look at the rivers. Where is it easier to defend? Where should I build a fort to slow them down? So this is actually terrain is quite important. And also, generally speaking, if you want to annex territory, it's better to annex nice farmlands like Venetia than to annex Nenetia up here, which is Arctic and gives you minus 50 farm size. You're not going to get much. Well, you have barely any people there because of the low province life rating, and you're not going to get much output from the good. Because as I said, each province produces a good. Anyway, I've spoken too long about terrain. Moving on. So next you have the RGO the province produces. So Turin produces fruit, for example. And if I hover over that, I can see how much fruit they've sold and what their max output is, rounded up. So I can see also here, the number here is 20.598. So it's rounded up here, max output 20.666, which is basically base times throughput times output. I'll get more into throughput and what output and what input means when I get to factories, because that's where it's more important in my opinion. But it's important to understand that how much output you're making, and that's directly related to how much money you're making per day. And that's always what's happened yesterday. So yesterday I made 37 pounds. Pounds, by the way, guys, is the common currency in the world, like ducats was in European Universalis, or like US dollar is today. But that's very important. So So 37 is how much I'm making for fruits. And of course, if I go to Novara, cattle is not making as much because there's not as much of demand for it, perhaps. And these prices will change as the game goes on. Wheat is very common, not as needed, so it's a very cheap. You're not going to get much out of it. But Turin is fruit is quite a wealthy good. Also, oh no, I have wheat here. Sorry, I thought I had silk. But yeah, so that's fruit. If we hover over it some more, we can see, so base output is 21. Our output efficiency is 136%. So that links directly to the technology you have. Base is 100. Owner Aristocrats, and this is where Aristocrats come in handy. And so I can see owners Aristocrats is plus 1.69. It's not that big of a difference, but when you think about it, it does add up quite a bit. So because I have my 1.7, which is actually 1.69, it's always rounded up, this will increase my output output efficiency. If you can think about it, the Aristocrats are the people that are cracking the whip and making sure your farmers and laborers are producing the either the fruit, the good, or the coal, or the either laborers or farmers. So hold on, let's hover over that. Yeah, so RGO output efficiency tech is plus 35%. So it's all of this included is what's giving me the 136. So 100 plus 1.69 plus 35. And of course, as tech gets better, my RGO my output efficiency will get better, and I'll be able to output more goods. So my max output will increase, and I'll get more money. Throughput is a bit more complicated, and it'll make more sense when I get to talking about factories, what exactly it is. Throughput is 71%, and this has directly to do with your farmers, because throughput is basically is the number of units of production, which might not make sense at the moment, but it's basically how much your farmers are producing. It's not necessarily output, it's just how much is in the works, how much is in production at the moment. So that has directly to do with how many farmers you have. So if you want higher throughput, if you want a higher output, you're going to want to go and encourage farmers, for example. And as you can see, so workers, farmers, 57.41, and that's because they make up that much percentage of the population that is employed. RGO throughput efficiency tech, and again, this has to do with technology, is 25%. So all this is increasing the throughput by 71%. So you add these up, so it's base, which is 21 from the output. So it's base, which is 21, times throughput, which is at 71%, times output, which is at 136%. And then you get 20.6, which is the max output. And that'll tell you how much fruit or how much of a good you're making. And over here, it's the same thing. We can see how much money we're making from the good, from the output. Yeah. This is the amount of current employees. As you can see, I have 192,900 out of a total of 335,000. You'll most likely never reach the maximum all the time. There'll always be some leftovers. But frankly, you don't need to max out. You never should feel the need to max out on the amount of farmers or laborers. Current employees, so that's basically how many people I have. And this directly has to do, for example, in Turin, the farmlands increases the size of the maximum by 20%, and the province size is times 7. So, for example, Aosta, which is much smaller than this huge province of Turin, only has province size times 1. So there's less space to sell wool, or produce wool, I mean. So for Turin, which is a very large province, you can see has a very much larger maximum amount of employees that can be employed there. And then this small number just means basically current employees in RGO, so percentage. And if we go back here, if we hover over here, we can see workers, farmers 57%, and that's this over here. That's current employees in the RGO. If I click on Turin, however, you'll see that 81% are farmers. That means that I have some unemployed farmers that can be re-employed depending on circumstances, or they'll remain unemployed. So that's that. Never feel that you need to get up to 100%. The only thing you ever need to get 100% to are factories. But frankly, you're most likely not going to get up to 100% in any RGO, and that's fine. I'm just going to take a quick water break. Ask any questions if you would like. Okay, continuing on. This is crime. If we remember, we were looking at the revolt risk map mode. So currently Turin has rotten boroughs, which gives me a number of voters plus 100%. So the system of rotten boroughs was a system to create such a small voting districts that a certain victory could be won through plain bribery. So this is rotten boroughs through bribery, corruption, basically getting people to vote for your party. So whichever party's in power, they'll have a bonus in Turin because they have rotten boroughs. So Novara also suffers from the same thing. I'll go through quickly some of them. Spoil system, ruling party support plus 200%. This directly influences. So the ruling party currently is the Restaurantzinci, reactionaries. So they'll have plus 200% support in Nice. Savona, immoral business. So this is actually the worst, frankly. These two can, rotten bureaus and spoil system can actually be really helpful for you. Don't get me wrong, I'm against vote rigging, but in this game, it can actually be really helpful to maintaining your preferred political party. But this is the worst, though. Immoral business, which is the rising crime rates and less government control. Businessmen would become more and more centered on their own profits. This results in a high risk of collapse for the entire system, as everybody strives for personal interests. So that's immoral business, basically, and it's kind of shown by a prostitute. But that minus 20 RGO output is really harmful. And you can, if you hover over this, you can see the modifier under base minus 20. This is very harmful for you, and you want to destroy that. And you remove that all by increasing administrative efficiency, which will increase the crime fighting ability. Machine politics is another one. Basically, strength of the strongest party plus 500%. If we go to politics later on, you can see the conservatives are 70%. So in Chambry, conservatives will be far stronger. So you can read, the system of machine politics was in essence the bribery of mainly minorities by politicians using their influence. Basically, you'll get machine politics in places where you have unaccepted cultures. So especially in Savoie, which is 100% French, which is not accepted, you'll have a very high amount of machine politics. You'll have a very high amount of machine politics. Down here, yeah, the same. So that's pretty much it. Later on, you can get anarchic bomb throwers, which increase militancy. But that's much later in the game. You can just keep a tab on this, looking at revolt risk, and you can also see it here. Generally speaking, you want to get rid of it all, because you cannot get rid of immoral business at the same time while keeping rotten boroughs. Once you try to get rid of immoral business, which is terrible for you, you're also going to start removing rotten boroughs and all that. Next is province crime fighting rate, and this is linked directly to type of crime you have, if at all. Crime fighting, so right here is 52%, so the base value is 20%. And then from administrative spending, it's plus 15.4. That's budget. Well, where am I? That's budget. So the max is 39.5. From state administrative efficiency, 17.4. That state administrative efficiency is right up here. So if I hover over it, this affects my crime fighting. So generally speaking, this doesn't have to be so overly complicated. Basically, the more bureaucrats you have in the state, the more you're spending here on your budget to bureaucrats, the higher this percentage is going to be, and you will no longer have a crime over here. Also, crime fighting helps lower militancy, although very small, in a very small amount, not that much. And here you can see average militancy, which is the same as revolt risk mode, which is 0 at the moment. Everywhere, yeah. Next, we'll quickly go through. So let me hold on. Let me see if I'm missing anything. Look at my notes quickly. Yes, this is basically organized crime. That's a good way of explaining organized crime. Yeah. So next, population. Your population of your entire province. Migration this month to Turin, for example, which is 0. The game hasn't begun, and province growth this month through births, through babies, basically. So how many people are growing, and you can see if you hover over it, you can see the base is 0%. I haven't researched any technologies which would increase it, but then you can see from tech and province life rating. That's actually another thing I forgot. So province life rating increases the amount of province growth. So Paris, which has 40, oh, I cannot see it. But if I was playing as France, you'd see that bonus right there. Turin is province life rating of 35, so I get a nice small 0.05% bonus. I cannot emphasize again how much important population growth is, because it ties directly to how big your population is. Your pops, how large your pops are. Definitely, province growth is very important. If you're losing growth, try to fix it immediately. You do not want to be losing people. Because losing people means smaller army, smaller craftsmen, smaller farmers, laborers, etc. Less money for you, less opportunities. Next is workforce. These are kind of what is represented in Turin, basically. Workforce, ideology, culture. So the 81% are farmers, 9% are artisans, 4% aristocrats, for example. More importantly, you can see ideology and culture. So ideology is 68% conservative. Alessandria, it's also 68. I suppose it's around 68 or 69 for all these places, because the game hasn't begun yet. But you can see what your people are preferring in Turin. And then you have culture. This is the most important one in this area. It shows what the culture is basically. So 100% North Italian, which is good, while Annecy has 100% French. We'll show different pie chart. Currently everything is 100%, but you can also see it for other places. So for example, not everything will be 100%. So for example, Vienna is 97% South German, but 2% Czech. Prague is 89% Czech, 10% South German. Berlin, you can see, has got a small 2% Polish population, 97% North German. This is very important, the culture. Don't underestimate it. But to see a more detailed view, you just click here, and it's this basically this screen, population, and it'll go directly here. So within the state of Piedmont, Novara, and I can see my different pops. I'll talk about all this later, but you can see the same thing over here in more detail. This is more like a quick reference, I suppose. Next, supply limit. So for example, here Turin is farmlands. So I have 40, which is base of 16 and then times 2.5, as well as some hidden modifiers. So that's that. Toulon has a base of 16, although it's also farmlands. The reason is that you don't get that times 2.5 owner bonus. So as you can see, if I hover over this, I get owner times 2.5. So obviously within my own territory or within allies territory, I don't have any allies right now. There's a much higher supply limit for my troops. And if always just click army, click the supply limit, and you can see where they can go without gaining attrition. So they can go to Toulon with my 12,000 man army. So this is not 12,000 because there's 3,000 per each. What was I saying? But it's 50. But you can see here 16. So that 12 army can fit in Toulon. Yeah, so that supply limit is very straightforward. Can't explain more than that. More importantly now, however, is cores. Cores, for example, are what your country has a claim on. Unlike in other games, if you played Hearts of Iron, this is exactly the same in Hearts of Iron. Cores will not change throughout the entire game, except if you're playing a mod, perhaps. But unless through either creating a dominion or through events, usually through events and decisions, you will never get a core on a province. Cores do not change. Cores are not removed, except through decision, as I said. As I can see in Turin, I have Sardinia Piedmont has a core, so I have a claim on all this territory, which means that I consider it to be my own territory. While France, of course, has province cores on all this. But if you'll notice, you also see Italy here. It does not mean that Italy can be released or can be freed from here. Basically, I can only form it. It doesn't really tell you. You just kind of need to know. Same for Germany. You can see the German Empire here. So Germany claims all of this to be their territory. What's a good place? For example, especially in Eastern Europe, you can see a lot of different cores. Because a lot of different nationalities have different claims on the territory. So you can see Poland, Lithuania. You cannot release Poland, Lithuania. It's a united thing. Lithuania, though, Poland, Ukraine can all be released in Statmar. While, for example, in Croatia, Austria, so on, have their own cores there. Cores will basically also represent where your preferred culture, such as North Italians for me, will like to migrate and stay in. So if you can, try to stick to cores, but of course that wouldn't be fun if I told you to do only that. Expand, don't feel afraid of expanding, but beware that if you expand, for example, if I took Provence, which I do not have cores on, and France maintains their cores here, which they will, they can easily retake it from me in another war without having to justify it or anything. Cores are, in other words, very important. Yeah. So that's cores. And for example, an example of a decision one is Italia Irredenta. Once I unite Italy, I can pass this decision and I'll get cores all over the Adriatic coast over here. Right. So that's that. Moving down here, these are your infrastructure, I suppose you can call them. Well, railroads is more just infrastructure, but these are buildings you can actually build on the map. Forts are very important. They currently at this level, at level 0, they increase your colonial range by 100. What that means is that I can reach Ayum, if I hover over it, or actually no, I'm sorry. If it was by land, so for example, if I was playing as Russia and I wanted to colonize Uralsk, this is what I would have to do. I can't do it right now because I have no naval base close to enough to it, but the land would allow you to, touching the land would allow you to colonize it, basically. That's basically what it means, that 100. But the next level gives me fort level +1, and fort level gives you a defensive bonus if you're sitting on it, I don't have any forts at the moment, but for example, this army right here in Austria is getting a defensive bonus because of that fort. And you can see this thing. This is a fort. And in total, there are one. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 levels of forts you can get, and each one increase per technology group. You can increase it through technology, the fort level. To expand it or to build one, you see discovered post-Napoleonic thought, economic policy. Sorry, I think there's 6. Yeah, allows fort. Yeah, there's 6 levels. I'm sorry. There's 6 levels. And it's especially important to build them on your border provinces to stop enemy, to make it longer, because also it gives you a defensive bonus if you're sitting on them. If I were to go into Milan, it would take me longer to occupy Milan and capture it because it has that fort there. You can negate this through different types of units, but I'll talk about this later. It also would, as I was saying, it forces the AI or you to capture a province for longer. And I was also talking about Annecy and Chambry. They have much higher attrition costs, right? So if there was a fort here in Annecy and the French were invading me, they would spend a lot longer time on Annecy trying to occupy it, and they would slowly by slowly take more and more attrition because they would have to spend more time there. That's a very effective way of using forts. So forts, build them on their sides. If you don't have enough money like I am, strategically build them. Like I would perhaps build it in hills, because the supply limit is lower. So I can it'll affect them easier than on farmlands where the supply limit is very large and it won't really affect them except for slowing them down a bit. So that's forts. I can't really explain more than that. Next is naval base, which is very important. Here we can see in Genoa it's got a level 1. You can see the level 1. Also the picture will change as you upgrade. So we can see here level 0 gives me a colonial range of 100. And this is what I was talking about in Western Morocco. This and a couple other things. So I'm getting 100 from that naval base, and I'm getting 9 from something else. I'm not 100% sure. There's some hidden modifiers included. But as you increase it, you increase your colonial range. So the next level, once I build this, I get plus 50 basically. But I also get local ship build time minus 10%. Different types of ships requires you to build higher levels of naval bases in Heart of Darkness expansion. So if you want to get better navy, and I'll talk about this later, you're going to want to have a higher level of naval base. But generally speaking, that local ship build time is really great. And we can see it's always the same thing. So for Genoa to get up to level 2, it gives you a colonial range of plus 100 and then local ship build time of minus 20. So that's a huge bonus. So naval bases are expensive. And if you hover over these, by the way, guys, you can see how much it's going to cost you and why you can or cannot build it. So little green asterisk means yes, X means you still have to get there. Generally speaking, you can fulfill the resource needs without having them prior. What I would recommend, I'll mention this later. Let me talk about railroads quickly. Railroads are OP, are really overpowered in this game, and I guess they are realistically. Again, they give you a colonial range of plus 100. But at the next level, this is where it gets interesting. You get a small supply limit boost, plus 0.64. Your factory throughput, plus 16%, how much units are in production. Your RGO output is plus 16%, and then troop movement cost minus 5%, which means they move faster. Railroads are really helpful. If you're having a tough time in industrial power, building a lot more railroad or upgrading railroad will really help with this. Railroad is extremely helpful, guys, and there are also many levels of it, and that's through the infrastructure. So there's 1, 2, 3. So there's 6 levels as well. Same with naval bases, by the way, guys. There's 6 naval base levels. Again, they're quite cheap at the beginning. They get much more expensive later on, and you can have actually your capitalists build railroads. You cannot have your capitalists build naval bases or forts because obviously it's not a good they can make money off of, like railroads are. Generally speaking, your capitalists will build railroads in places they have invested or they have factories already in. So don't expect, for example, if I were to take over Tunis, don't expect my and I'm not allowed. I can build railroads here, but I cannot build factories because it's a colonial province, right? Um, so my capitalists will not build railroads here because they do not have any investments here. If my capitalists get really rich, they might start doing this for me, but generally speaking, they'll only build it where they have investments, which is in your home territory at the beginning of the game, at least. Um, so that's railroad, yeah. You can also see other territory, their level. So fort, naval base, railroad. This is very important to check up on. So you can see Toulon is a major naval base, level 2 already. London, Plymouth, yeah, level 2. I think the highest right now is level 2 only. So yeah, so that's railroad. And what I was going to say, before you build them, if you don't have timber, steel, cement, or in the case of naval base, timber, cement, steel, cement, machine parts, lumber already, you're going to have to pay extra. To counter this price, you can go to your trade screen and you can stockpile on the goods. And I'll talk about how you stockpile later, but I just want to mention it now. To decrease the price of building a fort, naval base, railroad, you can go to trade and you can try to stockpile on these goods, and then you can build them. And because you already have them, you don't have to buy them from the world market, and you can put them to use immediately. And it'll begin production immediately as well, if you already have the goods present. But other than that, you don't actually need the timber, steel, cement already present within your country to start. All you need is the first 4. So I need the technology. My economic policy allows it for railroads only. Level of infrastructure. So I cannot yet because I don't have the technology yet, and I need the money. The timber, steel, cement, even though it's an X, I can still build it there. Although it'll take even longer to build, and it'll be more expensive. Generally speaking about railroad, however, for level 1, for example, you probably won't be able to build railroad there immediately. So for example, in Aussie, if you hover over it, it's -3 because of the mountains. So I have to get up to level 3 infrastructure to start building railroad there. And that's when it'll begin to affect it. Before then, I cannot build railroad here. And you'll see it'll be continuously in red. Hills, for example, is the same thing. It's only -1. So you have to get up to level 2 to start building railroad there. So that's that. This is factories, and I'm going to talk about factories next, but you can see what you need. So you need to be civilized. You can only build 8 factories, so there's 0 out of 8. I can build factories. That's depending on my my government type. And it has to be a non-colonial state. So I can build railroad here in a colonial state, for example, but I cannot build factories. And what you do is click here. It takes you to Piedmont in your production screen, and you have all the factories you can build. The factory will expand as you research new technologies, but currently it's all grayed out because I don't have enough money, and I can choose what to build. Let me see, surreal. Yeah. Next is these are kind of rally points. When you build a unit or you want to build units together, you just click here and they'll all come. So whenever they're built, they'll all come to Alessandria. And you can click here to enable or disable them merging. So they can either become individual armies or they can all merge together. This makes creating large armies very easy, very quickly. And you can do the same thing for naval bases. So where do you want all your ships to? When they're produced, where are they going to go? So I can do it to Savona. You can also do this for territory you're either at war with or you have open borders with, military access with. And I'll talk about this later. Currently, I have military access with no one. But if I had military access with France, I could go here and I could tell all my troops to come to Toulon when they're ready. So this is very useful. And then you have down here, build army, build navy. First, I'll start off with army. Army is dependent on your supply limit. So we have fielded 11 out of 12 possible brigades. I'll talk about this more later. Currently, I can only get one more brigade. So if I click on build army, I can see what I have here. I have my irregulars, infantry, hussars, dragoons, so on and so forth, and I can build one. So if I click on, for example, infantry, it'll take me 90 days. I can see the culture, North Italian, where they're coming from, Genoa, and what I'm going to need to build to make them. So canned food, 18 canned food and 18 small arms. So I click here, and it's begun. So gathering the following goods before construction can begin. So small arms, canned food. Again, it's going to be a little bit more expensive if you do not have these goods already and already in your stockpile. This usually pertains for military goods, by the way, guys, like small arms, which can be a bit harder to find, especially at the beginning of the game. But so it'll take a little bit longer to build, and it'll be a little bit more expensive. Currently, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to cancel it. But you do the same thing for Navy ships. But again, you also have a weight. I'll talk about this again later, but again, you can click here, and it'll begin, same thing. So this time, a man of war needs artillery and clipper convoys. And you can also see when it'll be finished by. Yeah, I'm going to cancel this now, just left click. So that's this. Is there anything else I want to talk about? No. Next, I'm going to be going directly into production, which I'm going to take you to Italy. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll probably cut right